Episode 13, Becoming a Fearless Data Presenter.
Can really tell when you enjoy something, and people can really tell when you don't enjoy something. When someone's presenting something they're not good at or they don't like, it really comes off in the delivery.
Welcome to the Data Nerd Podcast. I'm your host, Nisar Ahmed. Join me as we explore the inner data nerd inside all of us. Dive into the world of data alongside special guests who not only share their wealth of experience and knowledge, but also unveil what truly makes them data nerds. This podcast is brought to you by Business Intelligence. That's BIZNIS Intelligence. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at Business Intelligence to stay up to date with Tableau training and the Data Nerd podcast. Connect with me on LinkedIn or stream the Data Nerd podcast across all major podcast platforms. Welcome to the Data Nerd podcast. Today I have the pleasure of having Hana M on. She is an award-winning data presenter who helps data professionals go from nervous, unsure communicators to becoming expert data storytellers and presenters that have their work make an impact and their message resonate with their audiences. Hana has over 10 years of experience working in the data field, starting out as a graduate researcher at UCLA before leaving her PhD program to work as a data professional for a Fortune 5 company. She's also the host of the Art of Communicating Data podcast, where she's had the honor of hosting guests like best-selling author Cole Newsbomber Knaflick on her show. She also conducts live trainings on O'Reilly for data professionals. So welcome, Hana, to our to the Data Nerd podcast. Pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, and I know we talked for maybe a few months back trying to get you on, and so
Yeah.
finally we were able to get this scheduled. But I'm excited about this because I think this is a topic that we can both relate to. And again, the topic being becoming a fearless data presenter. And we can talk about some of our experiences in trying to become better presenters or communicators. But before we do that, I do like to ask all my guests a question before we start. And I like to ask, if this being the Data Nerd podcast, I like to ask if you are a data nerd. And if so, tell me your story and when you realized you were one.
Sure. I so my educational background is actually in geography, and it wasn't until I was a grad student and I started to do data analysis for the first time, or like I actually realized I was doing data analysis for the first time, I should say, for my research. I was looking at the influence of the atmosphere on Antarctic sea ice, and when I started to look into the data, I was just really amazed that I can find so much substantial insights from just looking at the data rather than, going, on the field myself and all that stuff. Like it was just, I don't know, mind blowing to me that the data can have so many different stories, and I'm just looking at just one piece of it.
Mm.
And it really fascinated me. And so part of trying to get trained and being able to do this research, I took a stats course in my graduate school, and then I also learned how to code. It was mostly self-taught because these were languages that are not very popular. Also, like data analysis, well, specifically the field of data science wasn't very popular at that time. But what I was doing as a grad student was more related to data science and big data and data analysis, even though a lot of these terms didn't exist at that time.
Yeah.
And but like when I started to visualize and analyze the data, I just became really obsessed with it. And I decided that instead of pursuing an academic career, I wanted to leave my PhD program, work in the industry as a data analyst. And that's why I moved back to the Bay Area, and I've been here since then.
No, that's awesome, and I think there's a lot of people who can resonate with your story because, so I teach a data analytics class, and I've had the pleasure of you being a guest on in my class as well, right? Answering questions from the students, and a lot of the students are working professionals who are now trying to get into data and learn how to
Mm.
use data, right? And I think data is all around us, regardless of what of job you do. And so you were able to kind of find your way into data analytics by not through the traditional method, but kind of learning on your own and figuring it out. And I think a lot of people are in a similar type of boat as well. I don't know. Do you hear stories about that as well? About, people who are um, just once they start working with data or they're in a different industry or career or doing something else, they start, wanting to actually get more into it.
Yeah, especially from like my cohort, because again, like data science wasn't a very popular term at the time. The hype wasn't there. And so a lot of us kind of stumbled into it accidentally, not with like the intention of going and working the data field. And then now many of us, we were like, I'm just even thinking about my college roommates. We were in such different fields. We had a pre-med student, someone in education and policy, and then I was doing geography, and we're all doing data stuff now. We're all data professionals in some shape or form. And it's really fascinating. We never intended to get here, but here we are.
Yeah, no. And myself, I've always been in data, that's kind of what I studied. But I think, and this is a kind of a segue into our topic, I got into data visualization
Mm.
um maybe over the last 7 to 8 years. And that's where my career kind of took a different turn. And there's this whole art in communicating data. And I think data visualization or business intelligence really allows you to do that, right? And I'm assuming you work with a business intelligence tool as well.
Yeah, I'm familiar the most with Tableau,
Yeah.
and yeah, I really like that tool. It was actually the more popular tool at that time when I was learning data visualization for the first time too, and I think it's a very good one.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can see right behind me.
Yeah,
I have
the
no,
logo.
I have kind of a bias towards Tableau. But I started this podcast, and I know you have a podcast as well. And when I was starting off, I was searching other people who had similar types of podcasts talking about data or data analytics. I stumbled across yours,
Oh,
and to be honest, I took a lot of inspiration from listening to your podcast, and that's what brought me to create my own. I was like, you know what, I can do this. Um, I'm an introvert. I know you talk about being an introvert as well, right? But here we are, we're both podcast hosts. We both work in data and we communicate data. We do presentations now. How did you or how did we, I mean, I know my story, but I want to talk about you. How did you become somebody who is in a position now to teach others how to present data and communicate data, coming from a background where you were more of an introvert or, I'd say more of a, I guess, shy person. Um, and that's not to say you're still not an introvert. Because I think you can still be an introvert and
right.
still be effective at communicating, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point to make is that I still consider myself a shy and quiet introvert. Even though I have a podcast and a lot of times people see me in these situations where I'm on video or on interviews, in my normal day-to-day life, I tend to be quiet and I only speak when I have something to say. And it's a quality and a trait that I thought was a bad thing, especially in the corporate world, but surprisingly, my managers have given me this feedback that they really appreciate that, especially in heated discussions or meetings. They know that when I speak, it's when I have something valuable to add. So there's some power with these kind of qualities that we tend to not appreciate, and I'm starting to lean into that more. But yeah, in terms of like how I got here, it actually starts with me trying to overcome my fear of heights. I know it sounds really random, but it's
Mhm.
related. And it's a journey that started more than 20 years ago when I was a young girl. I mean, I've always been afraid of heights, but in middle school especially, there was a field trip I remember it was right before we graduated from middle school. So our school took us as a treat to a indoor rock climbing gym. And we were kind of given the freedom. There's no competition. You didn't have to like climb if you didn't want to, but just do whatever you want. You can just hang around. And there's like professionals there to make sure that you're safe and all that. And so I remember that anytime I started to climb somewhere, as soon as I started to feel the fear of heights kick in, which was usually only like a few feet off the ground, my palms would get sweaty and I'll just climb back down. I didn't get out of my comfort zone. I was just taking it easy. But towards the end of the trip, when I was doing my last climb, and I started to hit that point where I usually climb down, something inside of me just said, like, just take one more step forward, like, just keep going climb one more step. And I kept doing that. And I kept getting, my palms started getting sweaty. I started to get really nervous. My body started to freeze. And I remember just like being stuck there for a few seconds. And then the belayer, I think that's what they're called, the one who manages your rope slack and tension. They started to guide me on where to put my hand next and my feet. And my classmates were watching at that time too and like, encouraging me to keep going because they know how I was afraid of heights and I wasn't really pushing myself until that moment. And I did finally climb all the way to the top. And I remember that feeling, and I still recall that feeling of when I finally reached the top. I just felt like so proud of myself for pushing myself out of my comfort zone and doing something that was really, really scary and being okay. Like I survived it and I'm just so proud of myself. And so after that, I told myself, I'm going to tackle my other fears. And
Mm.
when I went to high school later that year, I enrolled in theater and drama, speech and debate, and mock trial because I wanted to overcome my fear of public speaking. And the interesting thing is that today I'm still afraid of heights
Mm.
and I still get nervous about public speaking, but I enjoy it now. I enjoy going on roller coasters, even though I'm scared of heights, and I enjoy public speaking and talking to others and doing my podcast, even though I still get nervous sometimes. But over the 20 plus years, I've gathered so many different techniques in this toolbox I have, and I use them whenever I need them to help me manage my nerves and my fears whenever they do come. And it gets easier with time. So this is how I got here. And so when I did become a data professional, I already had the skill of public speaking and presenting, and I just use that in my professional career.
You know, as you were talking, I was like, you know what? That's I can relate 100%. I didn't have a fear of heights. That's not my story, but I did have a fear of public speaking. Um, and that lasted through high school, right? I only really overcame
Mhm.
that actually once I started working. My early on in my career, I would just go to my desk and do my job, and meetings I would stay quiet. I think what happened with me and what changed was when I started working in Tableau. I um I became good at it, and it's
Mhm.
something that other people wanted to learn how to do at the company that I was
Mm.
with. And so I started training others in the company. That allowed me to kind of it gave me confidence, right?
Right.
And then I started teaching at other institutions part-time, data analytics. And as like you said, um, I still have a fear of public speaking. I'm not the type to just go into a party or a group and just start talking for no reason,
Mhm.
right? I still talk when there's, if there's a need to talk, but um, I enjoy it when I'm teaching others. I don't know what it is. I don't know why, maybe it's something that we're not used to, and when we do it, I don't know. I I can't quite explain it.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an explanation for that either, but I like this. I think this strategy is really helpful for folks who are listening and are nervous about this and don't know where to start. I think this is a great example of like start with doing it on a topic or yeah, with a tool that you really are passionate about, really well. So you have a lot of confidence in the content
Mhm.
and your passion shows up in the confidence in your delivery of the message. People can really tell when you enjoy something and people can really tell when you don't enjoy something when someone's presenting something they're not good at or they don't like. It really comes off in the delivery. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really good strategy that if you want to start, you can start by doing some trainings for your team or some like I know some companies have like these lunchtime learnings or whatever. You can try presenting there, small spaces, and then you slowly build the confidence to present to bigger and bigger groups and on topics that are more outside your comfort zone. I think that's a good way to finally get to that point where you feel like confident, possibly, starting a podcast like you have, or, delivering a keynote speech.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Um, so and I enjoy doing the podcasts as
Hmm.
well, right? I get to meet people like you, right? It, as an introvert and as someone who didn't like public speaking, the whole networking
Mm.
aspect was really something I did not look forward to. Um, and I think now with social media, LinkedIn, online talk platforms, it becomes a little bit easier
It
for
does.
people, right? You don't have
Definitely.
to do it in person necessarily.
Oh yeah, I totally feel that. Especially I was thinking about actually when Clubhouse came out and this was also during the pandemic. I was like this if networking is like this is so much easier than in-person networking. I know Clubhouse is still a little bit more work than on social media because you're on audio, but
Mhm.
I still found that to be a lot easier than in-person networking. I totally agree.
Yeah. But what I do find now that when I do have to go in person, I do try to network more than I used to.
Mm,
All right. So I think, like you said, this that fear is still there, but you still some steps to do that. But let's talk about, becoming a fearless data presenter, which is something that you teach, right? Do you have a course out there? Tell me about that. The
yeah. So I have a short audio course called the Fearless Data Presenter, and it's something I created like a few months ago. I was really passionate about it because I realized I had like a bigger, more comprehensive course that I thought covered everything. It was more about how to make effective presentations. And it, covered everything from the preparation, practicing, creating the slides, delivering, after delivery, all that stuff. But then I realized there were still some people, like especially particularly one student who came to me after finishing the course and was like, "This course is great. This is so helpful, but I don't think I'll ever be a confident presenter." And I thought about that comment for several weeks, and it made me realize there was a gap, and I wanted to address that in a smaller audio course that's more accessible to everyone and very affordable and cheap because my goal is like as many people can take it as possible. And it's just about addressing these limiting beliefs, these self doubt, the fear and anxiety we get, these limitations that are in our way in letting us be confident and fearless presenters. And so it being an audio course format, I also included, I thought it was really appropriate and important for me to include affirmations in there too, because that is really necessary for people like me who used to have severe limiting beliefs. Stuff like I will never be a naturally good public speaker. So I have lessons that address that, but then I also had affirmations because we sometimes constantly need to be told this. It's when we
Mhm.
tell these stories to ourselves and we're at this point where, we're 20 in our 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever have you, it's hard to unlearn that and change the script overnight. So, um, that's why I created this course to hopefully help people with that. And I've been so happy to see that it has helped some folks so far.
Is this focused on for for in the data professionals, or is it for anyone?
Honestly, it could be for anyone, but specifically, I talk about data professionals and the imposter syndrome we experience sometimes, and um, there are some things that are unique to data professionals, but it can be actually for anyone. But my company I tend to focus on data professionals just because I can relate to them.
Yeah.
So other technical folks possibly as well could benefit from this course.
So when you talk about data professionals, what are some of the challenges that data professionals can face when presenting their data or findings and how can they overcome some of those fears?
Yeah, the challenges can vary depending on the person because we have different personality traits and experiences and knowledge. One of them, the common one that people often experience is this fear of public speaking, which it can be addressed. It's very easy to address once we realize that public speaking is a skill, and just like any other skill that you've acquired as a data professional, you can get good at it. You can learn it, you can hone it, you can develop it and keep practicing it and just get better at it over time, which has been my experience, and I'm sure your experience as well as a public speaker. We just keep getting better at it. We not may not our first public speaking event may not be that great, but we don't get discouraged and say, "I'll never be a good speaker." So that's like a common challenge I see. But then another challenge that I find to be more concerning the public speaking than the fear of public speaking is that our presentations are not effective or having an impact. And this is where it's very specific, I think, to data professionals and maybe other fields as well. But as data professionals, we often are sharing our insights or findings or recommendations from our data work. We may have proposals. We may have developed a model that we want to get approved. So in order for our work to have impact, we usually need buy-in, and we usually need stakeholders to agree or to follow our recommendations.
Mhm.
And that's where the presentation is so important, because this is our opportunity to convince our stakeholders, our target audience, to do something. And when we present, sometimes some people will think they had a very confident delivery. The contents, they feel like they delivered everything they wanted to say. But then the presentation is done and nothing has happened, nothing has changed.
Mhm.
And they get frustrated, and they'll wonder that maybe it has to do with their audience not understanding, like the audience is not technical enough, they don't have enough knowledge, which may be true, but that's a mistake assuming that, because really it's our responsibility as the presenter for making sure our audience is able to understand our message and know what it is that they need to do. We need to really spell that out for them. And so that's an important piece of becoming an effective data presenter, is that you want to make sure you're not just like having a confident delivery, but your presentation is actually having an impact. And I think that's what we do want deep down. We do want our work to mean something. We don't do our work just for the sake of it. We want to be able to make change and have an impact. So that's why I think this is more concerning than the fear of public speaking, because at least when we are not good at public speaking or we're afraid of it, we're aware of it. But this challenge, I think not many people are aware they even have this challenge.
Yeah, a lot of good points you brought up, right? And so some of the key points that I thought about is knowing your audience. Who are you talking to, right?
Mhm.
The other point you brought up about as a data professional, it's part of our job to communicate to the stakeholders. And I think a lot of people may think that being a data professional is just about going to your desk, creating a report or a dashboard or doing analysis, whatever it may be, and then emailing it out to the stakeholders and letting them figure it out. But no, um, I see myself as that middleman between the technical data and the stakeholders, whether it be
Mhm.
executives or product managers, project managers, whatever it may be. And so it's our job to communicate those insights. It's not just here's your dashboard,
Mhm.
have fun, right? You have to train them. How do you use it? What are the insights? And so you talked about confidence, right? Being confident in um on the topic that you're presenting. Okay. But I think the unknown here, and I think this is a fear, is that you may be asked questions that you don't know the answer to, right?
Mhm.
And so how do we deal with that? How do we overcome that fear, and how do we deal with questions that we may not know the answer to?
Yeah, that's a very valid fear, and I have had this fear as well. But for presentations, I think the best strategy is that I would recommend is that we practice saying I don't know, or a longer version of that being I don't know, but I will look into it and find out and get back to you.
Hmm.
I really recommend practicing that, because the alternative I've seen is that people will try to make up an answer on the spot. It can come off as BS. There could be a lot of assumptions baked into that response. It's not going to be a well-formed response, and it can be dangerous, because if it turns out, if your target audience or whoever asked you that question,
Hmm.
if they find out that it's not an accurate response, it is BS, it can make you lose your credibility and the credibility of your entire presentation. So I think it's really important that we practice and saying I don't know, so that we can get comfortable with not knowing. I know as data professionals that can be hard for us it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's a better answer, and especially saying that you'll follow up and you'll find out. that is a better answer, and it will also lead to more discussions afterwards because then the contents of your presentation you'll continue discussing with with that person. So I would recommend that we practice and get comfortable with saying I don't know, and I will follow up.
There's nothing wrong with not like you can't know everything.
Right. Yeah.
And I think when you're given a project, right? If a manager says, I want you to ask you a question and want you to do something, they're not asking for the answer right away. You're
That's a good
given
point.
some
Yeah.
time to come up and do your analysis, right? And so in a live presentation, you may need some time as well. And like you said, the worst thing that can happen is your audience or your stakeholders not trusting you.
hmm
Okay. And if you give or you make up an answer, like you said, they can read through it. They know, like I mean, you're talking to people who know the business, right? And if you're
Right.
making up answers, it's not a good look on you. So like you said, there's nothing wrong with not knowing the answer. Um, so let's talk about some of the um storytelling techniques, okay, in presentations, right? Um, I use data visualization, right? And so there's ways to communicate data effectively um, using whether it be Tableau, Power BI, whatever tool you're using. Do you find that in for data professionals using data visualization is an effective way to communicate and can really enhance your communication skills?
Definitely, especially in the part when you're presenting your supporting insights or findings. Showing a data visualization that really highlights that is better than putting up a table with a bunch of numbers. Or also, it's just, says saying like a picture is worth 1,000 words. Data visualizations can be really powerful in getting that message across um, to whoever you're speaking to, and especially if that visualization is well designed and it's in a chart type that your target audience is able to understand. So I really recommend using data visualizations. And as you mentioned, if you're doing Tableau, but you are presenting on a PowerPoint or whatever slide deck software, being able to get that image into Tableau or presenting on Tableau directly is a great way to do that as well. Although I tend to like the interactive nature of Tableau. So I tend to point people to the actual live visualization on Tableau afterwards so that if they can explore it if they want to.
Yeah. And I think also when we if our job is to create those dashboards or data visualization, there's also a component of training that's involved as well. Obviously, you want the dashboard to be self-explanatory, right? But you can't always assume that everyone knows how to use it, right? And so when you're communicating, I think part of communication is not just presenting findings, but also training
Mhm.
people on how to use whatever tool it is you develop for them, right?
Yeah, sometimes if your deliverable is a dashboard, then training on that in a presentation or like in a meeting, I think in person or like in person or live, whatever it is, rather than just sending it and letting them run with it, it increases the chance of people actually using it, and you want your dashboards to be used rather than collecting dust. I also recommend folks when they do that to have it recorded so that people can go back to it. Sometimes we go faster or too slow for people. And this way, when they have a recording, they're able to reference it at any time.
You know, that brought up a good point when you talk about recording. I used to hate listening to my own voice. Um, now I've recorded myself so many times, especially once I've done my podcast and I have YouTube tutorials. I'm used to my own voice, but recording myself also allows me to improve my presentation skills. Would you recommend that if you want to overcome some of the fears that you have, that recording and listening to yourself or watching yourself is a good strategy?
Well, this is a really good strategy. I do recommend that in my comprehensive course. When people are practicing, I recommend students that they do record it, and that the first time you play back the recording, you first listen to either the audio only, and the next time just the video, so you can actually look at your body language, your hand movements, your eye contact, and without getting distracted by the audio. So looking at the audio and video separately can also be really insightful in giving you some information about what kind of presenter you are, where do you need to focus on your improvements, and yet getting used to the sound of your own voice. It takes a while, and there's a whole science behind. I looked into it why we don't like the sound of our voice that I won't go
Mm.
into, but yeah, we can definitely get used to it. I used to be the same. I hated the sound of my own voice, but when I have to edit my podcast, I have to listen to myself. And also, I do a lot of social media. So I post videos of myself and I have to get used to looking at myself in a camera. Yeah, the more you expose yourself, the
Mhm.
better and easier it gets.
I have a theory on why we don't like listening to ourselves, and this is not backed by any type of study, just my own opinion. I think we're a harsher critic of ourselves than other people are of us, and when we hear ourselves, we try to think that we could have done better. But if you were to listen to me, you would not think the same thing.
Mm.
Am I making sense there?
That is a very common thing amongst data professionals, this imposter syndrome, and then
Yeah,
also this high expectations and standards in ourselves. Yeah, that comes into also like hearing ourselves. I can totally see that.
yeah. And you talked about listening to your voice only, audio, and then video, right? Because
Mhm.
communication is not just what's coming out of your mouth, it's also your hand gestures, right? How you use your hands, how your body language is, right? And as I'm watching you, right, I see that you're using your hands um, e- in a way that is effective. And I'm assuming that there's some type of training that's behind that, or that's something that we need to focus in on when we're trying to improve our communication skills, right?
Yeah, that is a very astute observation. Actually, yeah, with hands, it's harder for me to do in a virtual meetings where
Mm.
sometimes like the camera only shows maybe not to the level where my hands are. But yeah, as my speech and debate coach, she taught us that keep your hands above your waist, and also visible. Because when people can't see your hands, they tend to not trust people as much. This is maybe more applicable for in-person interactions. I think online people can understand if they can't see your hands, but in person, if someone's presenting and they have their hands hidden behind their back or you can't see them at all, studies have shown that it leads to people not trusting you. So that's why most presenters do show their hands. Although I
Yeah,
think it can be distracting sometimes. So you also want to watch that video without the audio and see, are your hand gestures really helping or are they a distraction?
I think you got to use it in moderation, right? You
Mhm.
can't just have your hands all over the place and then it takes the focus away from what you're saying, right?
Right.
Um, but then you brought up this point, virtual versus in person. Do you talk about the differences on how to present virtually versus in person?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I actually have like a whole separate course on virtual data presentations because there's some strategies that are very unique to virtual presentations and very necessary because I found the challenge with virtual presentations is that you're competing with more distractions. People on the other side, they're in their environment, they have background noise, but also noise in their foreground and other distractions
Mm.
that you're competing with. Their cell phones, there are other apps on their desktops that are open. It's just a lot easier for your audience to get distracted, and it's much harder for your presentation to have an impact when it's done virtually, which is very common now for a lot of us. So yeah, the a lot of the focus that I put into that is how to keep and maintain and engage your audience's attention throughout your presentation so that they're actually listening throughout and your presentation is having an impact on them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's talk about a lot of great advice here, right? And I think if people want to become more effective data presenters, there's definitely some resources out there that they can take advantage of. Can you talk about some of the resources or training programs that you would recommend for data professionals, particularly if they're looking to improve their presentation skills?
Yeah, first, I would recommend what we talked about earlier is that, if you want to start improving your presentation, just start presenting just more often. And that could mean presenting in front of your team, in front of your boss, whoever you're more comfortable with first, and just get practice doing it over and over again. And then I also have resources on my website and courses as well. I have a free roadmap for data presentations that you can download on my website, which is trending-analytics.com/roadmap. And you can download this free roadmap and it'll tell you how to prepare, like what you need to do to prepare for your next data presentation. And you'll also see when you download that roadmap, it'll also give you a link to my Fearless Data Presenter course. If that's something you're struggling with, I would recommend you take that course as well. And then, there's a lot of books out there as well. If you want to learn the art of presenting, if you want to learn how to design slides, I can share more links with you and you can put it in the show notes. I have a whole list of links, but I would definitely something I've noticed with data professionals that we sometimes will have like an accumulation of courses and resources and we delay acting. I would recommend that, even while you're listening to this, if you feel motivated to present more and try to overcome your fear of public speaking, is to look at your work calendar and see, are there opportunities for me to practice presenting in others and just trying to get over my fear of public speaking and, just take it one step at a time.
Yeah, I'll put all your website on in the notes for the podcast. I'll also can I put your LinkedIn profile there as well? Can
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great way to connect with me. I check my messages on LinkedIn often, so you can message me on there. You can also email me, but yeah, LinkedIn is probably easier for folks. And if you have any questions at all, any concerns about presenting or communicating data, I love to get these messages and help people. That's why I do what I do. And then I also have my podcast, The Art of Communicating Data. So I usually discuss more very specific and niche topics on there, like how to present to executives or to different audience members. So you can find a lot of helpful information on these podcasts.
Great. Yeah, no, I'll put all of that into the notes for this podcast, so people can have access to that. But this was a great discussion, Hannah. This is a lot of great tidbits and insights, and a lot of things that actually I didn't realize as well. I mean, I'm presenting. I do presentations. I have a podcast, but just listening to you, I've was able to learn a lot as well. And I think that's something that everyone can do is always be learning, right?
Mhm.
You will never know enough, and you can always get better. And I think that's true not just in presentation, but in any skill.
Oh, totally. I think that's the official motto of data nerds is that we always need to be learning and growing. That's that's the nature of our field. And if you don't enjoy learning, um, this is
Yeah,
the wrong field to be in.
that's true. That's true. And also you don't feel like you have to be at a certain level before you start presenting, right?
Mhm.
Start right away. What's I always ask myself this question, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
What's the worst that can happen when you present? I don't know. I think there's more pros and cons that can come from it.
This is a really good point. And but before we wrap it up, because it's a whole
Yeah.
thing we can
Yeah,
get
yeah,
into, but that's a really, really good point because what I found is that when we do get nervous when we present, the anxiety or the butterflies that kick in, it's because our flight and fight response is being triggered and our body's thinking there's like a life-threatening risk happening. And it's not true. Like when you think about it, when you
yeah.
ask yourself what's the worst that can happen, how bad, like
Yeah.
how crazy is this presentation? Like how much risk is at stake? It's not that much. It's not life threatening. The world's not going to end. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. It would be a different question if you're going skydiving, right?
Yeah. Right.
But presentations is not at that level.
Yeah.
Great. No, thanks, Hannah. This was great. And so thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Of course. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.